It seems like a day hardly passes when we don't hear talk about racism. Or systemic racism. Treating someone or a group of someone's in a good or bad way, just because of what many call their race, is not the right thing to do. There is certainly no biblical justification for treating people this way. Let's look briefly what drives these actions, and then dig a little deeper into what is fueling this fire, and then identify the cure for racist beliefs.
So, what is the underlying cause of racism? In a nutshell, it is the widespread adoption of an anti-scientific religious system. We will talk more about that in a few minutes.
We can see how that works if we think about the Bible verse, 2 Corinthians 5:7. It says, "We live by what we believe, not by what we can see." Let's think about this truth with a hypothetical example.
Although we could choose any number of bad attributes about these people, let's focus on one. Suppose we really believe that a particular group of people, a particular race of people, are mean. We may have grown up with parents that told us they are mean.
Or we may have heard other people we hang out with and respect tell us they are mean. They may have even used some Bible verses to support their statements.
We may have even seen a few of them do some things that we thought were mean. So when we see some of these people, particularly if they are in a group, our first thought is that they are probably planning to do something mean.
So we'll treat them like mean people. Or, perhaps, take some action to protect ourselves from them. Or, maybe, just hope someone else will do something to keep them from being mean to us. If it hurts them in some way, it might teach them a lesson they certainly deserve.
It really does not change our attitude if we are told they are not really mean, or if we know some of them that are not mean. We just conclude that there may be a few exceptions, but as a group, they are mostly mean. So, we treat them by what we already believe, not by the evidence in front of us.
Our perception of the different races is actually colored by our understanding about how our world obtained the different races.
There are two widespread views as to how the differences between groups of people happened: the conjecture of evolution and the teaching of the Bible. We will also find that scientific evidence agrees with the biblical teaching.
This is a rather complicated subject. We can, perhaps, best explain it by, first, looking at the beginning of life. After that, by examining the origin of human life. And, finally, seeing where the different, so-called races, came from.
Let's talk about the origin of all life. Evolutionists imagine that it all began with the oceans being like a soup with all kinds of chemicals. As they bumped together, by chance they formed more complex chemicals, which then combined with other clumps of chemicals. Eventually, they accidentally combined to form a living cell. Evolutionists guess that life began by random chemical interactions.
The Bible tells us that God is life, and is the source of all life. So the first living single-cell organism came from God. That life came from life. To see if a living cell could have happened by chance chemical encounters, let us look more closely at the single living cell.
Even a single-celled animal is very complex. It is not just a blob of chemicals that somehow splits and forms more similar blobs. It performs complicated functions that each require sensing, acquiring, and acting on a variety of types of information and substances. You could think of it as an information processor, although it is really much more than that.
One scientist studied and published his analysis of the information processing capabilities of a single-celled animal. He concluded that that single cell had greater information processing functionality than any computer on Earth. More functionality than the most sophisticated computer that we have produced with all of our intelligence and technology. The idea that this cell could have begun by an accidental random combination of chemicals is without any merit whatever.
The most reasonable explanation for life on Earth is that God created all organisms and gave them life. He is life, and the source of all life. Science affirms that life can only come from life. The thought that life can come from a random accidental combination of chemicals is anti-science. It does show extreme devotion to a false religion. We call it evolution.
Now that we have single-cell life, let us see how the world got people. On this next slide we show evolution's concept, how the single-cell transitioned to humans. In 20 seconds, we will show about 3.5 billion years of biological evolution. Ready? Set. Start.
There are deep divisions between leading evolutionists on how this occurs. Some evolutionists concede that neither genetic mutations nor natural selection, or any combination of them, can generate different kinds of organisms. Other evolutionists continue to cling to the hope that they can. Scientific advances increasingly reveal that biological evolution is not valid.
Let us, now, consider what the Bible teaches. It says that Adam and Eve were a special creation by God. Other Bible accounts suggest that this was about 6,000 years ago. Recent genetics research provides important information about this possibility. The mitochondria are important elements in each human cell. The genetic information in the mitochondria is called DNA. This DNA is a bit unique in that it comes only from the mother to her male and female children.
We now know that our mitochondrial DNA is changed over time by mutations. That is right. We are all mutants. But that is not a good thing. Mutations are damage to genetic information. Mutations do not add new information to our genes, they remove it. They really do not add capabilities to us. They eliminate them or cause parts of our bodies to malfunction.
And, unfortunately for them, our descendants inherit these mutations. It is interesting, though, human mitochondrial DNA tends to accumulate at the rate of one mutation about every 6 generations. If we are clever, we can use that as a kind of genetic clock to find out how long mankind has been on the Earth.
If biological evolution is correct, then there should be at least 681 mitochondrial DNA mutations across the human population. Or, if the Bible timeline of about 6,000 years is the one that is right, then there should not be more than 123 mutations. Guess how many mutations scientists have found? Well, it is bad news for evolutionists. Scientists have found that there are 123 human mitochondrial mutations.
We can find a similar human genetic clock from chromosomes. Humans have what are called X and Y chromosomes. But the Y chromosome is common to only males. An analysis of the mutations in the human Y chromosomes reveals that all men are descendants of a single male ancestor who lived about 4,500 years ago. I believe that would be a man named Noah. Science seems to support the Bible account that mankind was created by God about 6,000 years ago.
As we deal with the so-called races, let us ponder why there may be divisions between them. Evolution's foundation assumed some races to be more advanced than others. This is depicted in some of its graphics. Some races are shown to branch off from the Homo sapiens branch earlier with limited additional development, implying they are more primitive. While others continue to develop and become more advanced. Or another presentation places some groups near the bottom, implying they are more primitive. Although some modern evolutionists no longer allow such graphics, they have not changed the process that might logically lead to the same conclusions.
The Bible tells us that the next major event for humanity, after the creation of Adam and Eve, was the worldwide flood. It reduced the human population to 8 people, Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their wives. A different mitochondrial analysis can provide insight into this event. Since the mutations are passed down through the maternal ancestors, it also provides a genetic ancestry trail. A research biologist noted the trails led to one of 3 nodes. That means that all people are descendants of 3 women who lived about 4,400 years ago. These women are probably Noah's 3 daughter-in-laws.
A few hundred years after the flood, all living people lived together at a place called Babel. Because of their disobedience, God gave different families, different languages, and then scattered them around the world. Recent genetic studies have affirmed that all people groups in the world resulted by a dispersal from the Middle East area. The Bible states it this way: these are the people of the sons of Noah. From these families came all the languages, countries, and nations.
It is amazing that, if all people are descended from just 3 couples, Noah's 3 sons and their wives, that there is such a variety of how people look. We may not really know exactly how it happened, but it may be as a result of inherited traits, adaptation, and perhaps mutations. Remember that at Babel, all the people then alive were divided into groups and scattered around the world. It is quite possible that because of the inbreeding that occurred in these groups, some characteristics may have become dominant in them.
There is another possibility that we should consider. To help us understand it, look at these fish. Both of them are members of the same species, Mexican tetra, but they look quite different. The one fish is also often called the Mexican blind cave fish. Apparently, some Mexican tetra at some time in the past took up residence in caves, and now have no eyes and no pigment. Since it involves loss of capability, it initially sounds like a mutation. But closer study of the Mexican blind cave fish reveals that they really traded traits they didn't need for other capabilities that are better suited for surviving in that environment. This is an example of adaptation, not mutation.
The transition of the Mexican tetra to the blind version, over just a few generations, can be reproduced in the laboratory. The ability of organisms to adapt to their environment is a relatively new field of study. It is not well understood, but it appears to be built into their genetic structures. It provides creatures with some predetermined additional capabilities, but it cannot form new creatures. The key thought to remember is that there is something built into the creature that senses a change in its environment. It then responds by making changes that are pre-programmed in its genes. This allows better survival of the species in the new environment. It is so incredible that it must be regarded as strong evidence of an intricate design by an awesome creator.
We all know the rest of the story. Many people groups, with a variety of physical characteristics, have been increasing for about the past 3,500 years. And now, some people divide mankind into major groups called races, based on certain physical characteristics. But are the races really different from each other? According to the evolutionary model of separate development over the past 200 to 300,000 years, we would expect some variation within each race, but significant genetic differences between races.
According to the biblical account, we would expect a variation within each grouping of people to account for the uniqueness of each individual, but only a small genetic difference between the arbitrarily defined races. Only enough to account for minor physical differences. That is what science affirms. Genetically, science has measured 0.2% genetic difference between any 2 people alive, whether within or across races. But it finds only 0.012% genetic difference between any 2 races. That means the only difference between races is the characteristics that are used to define the races. So, we can see that the races are an artificial division of the human species.
In summary, we see that evolution is not supported by science, even in its most basic beliefs about the beginning of life and its mechanism of evolutionary changes. The belief that the races resulted from evolutionary development over the past few 100,000 years is wrong. The biblical account explains the occurrence of people groups, is scientifically consistent, and is supported by recent genetic research. Evolutionary theory supports racism while biblical teaching prohibits it. To God, every person is the same and can be accepted by Him. There is only one race, the human race.
The cure for racism is truth. Practically, there is no simple cure for racism. Racism is supported by the false religion of evolution. Evolution has been accepted by large numbers of people, and many people in powerful positions, worldwide and across many cultures. But we can each do our part, and share the truth with those around us. Evolution needs to be unmasked as false and damaging. The accuracy of the biblical account of mankind's history must be affirmed. We must value each living human as a very special creation of God. We need to pursue a personal relationship with Christ, so that we can see every other person the same way that He does, as an object of His infinite love.